Welcome to the Stand Up California community. Stand Up California is a grassroots project that connects activists on a county level to work together to ensure the restoration of our rights as outlined in the U.S. Constitution, the U.S. Bill of Rights, and the California Constitution. Stand Up California also helps educate local and state elected officials, county boards of supervisors, school boards, city council, as well as California State Assembly members and senators by providing activists succinct, well-researched materials. And
sometimes they vary between county to county, or the people that are of your own board of supervisors, city councils, and so on. I try to do as much research as I can before I go to a county or a city within our state. And just so that everybody knows, I have made my declaration for the 2026. And I am on a 4-year journey, basically campaigning up until the 2026 to try to disseminate this information, try to provide tools that will help people fight back in their county, to push back against the board of supervisors, city councils, your mayors, your sheriffs, and so on. Without the information, without kind of understanding how we got here in the first place, it's very difficult for us to, aim that needle in the right direction so that we can have laser-like accuracy and really trying to take back our state, our country. And that old saying, if whatever happens in California, so goes the rest of the nation. We really are at the epicenter of much of the egregious actions that are being placed upon us. So with that being said, let me share my screen. Here, let's see here. And let's go share. And let me go full screen here. Can everybody see that? All right. So yes, this is me. Real quick, a funny little note. It says here to offend you. I'm not here to insult you. I'm here to give you the truth. A lot of times, unfortunately, throughout the recall, and of course this last 2022 prime, I'd always come back and my wife would say, it sounds like you're offending a lot of people. And I said, I know, right? She says, well, maybe you should change your slogan from starve the government and feed the people to here to offend you, because the truth offends. And so really, I have two slogans, but this seems to be the one that gets people to walk out. Some part of this information that I always present, whether I change it up a little bit or I'm specifically talking on specific matters, there's always somebody who's offended, not because they don't believe with what's being presented, but it's a hard pill to swallow at times. And so a lot of times people will walk out. Elena can attest to numbers of people getting up and walking out on me, even cursing their way through the door. So again, it's not to insult, it's simply to present the information. What you do with it is up to you. So this is a very short version, and let's get moving here. Let's see if this works. Okay, so tonight we're going to be talking about Assembly Bill AB 1090, the removal of sheriffs and how this affects the role of the County Board of Supervisors. How is the California legislature supposed to represent their constituents? And why is everything falling on willful and complicit deaf ears, which bleeds into the role of the governor dealing with domestic enemies? So we're going to, I'm going to try to get through this as best I can. And please take notes if you have any questions along the way so that I can answer them. And just real quick, I don't have the answers to everything, but if you stump me tonight, I will do my best to come back and answer that question to you through an email or even a phone call directly or FaceTime of some kind. I'm always trying to find information, and I'm always trying to present that to people so that they can have it in their back pocket so that they know what they're doing when they go in front of their representatives. So California AB 1090, Los Angeles Board of Supervisors in 2022 November prime election locally beta tested ballot measure A. And so this based off of that. So it was a removal of sheriffs for cause of amendment, as you guys already know, allowing a 4/5 vote to remove the sheriff from officer's cause, which is defined to include misuse of public funds, properties, willful falsification or documents, or obstruction of an investigation into the department's conduct. The reason why I highlighted that there is because everybody needs to understand that right now, AG Bonta, our Attorney General, has gone after Riverside County Sheriff Bianco. And he's going after Bianco for the exact same outline. If you look at the court records of Leroy Baca, Los Angeles former Sheriff Leroy Baca was indicted for the same outline that AG Bonta is going after the Riverside Sheriff for. And this is designed to keep them in line, all the sheriffs, because a lot of our assembly are starting to pick up on the fact that we're trying to corner our sheriffs to doing the constitutionally right thing. So when people ask me, Daniel, are you going to do the right thing? My answer is no. I'm here to do the constitutionally God-given right thing. There's a significant difference between your right thing and my right thing. They don't align, which is why we have the framework and the foundational documents to use so that we can all bounce off of the same platform, the same frame, the same foundation. So our AG is trying to ensure that all the sheriffs are in line. So he's trying to utilize what's called stare decisis, which is what the courts utilize as if it was good law once, they're going to make it good law again. So if a similar situation arises, they're going to use that to outline a particular outcome. So, and if you look at that obstruction of an investigation into the department's conduct, well, that's very ambiguous because that can be anything. And so when they start investigating your local sheriffs, this is exactly what they're going to start having to deal with. And he's outlining exactly with what Leroy Baca was put through before he was indicted and removed from his position. Assembly Bill 1090, drafted by Assembly Jones Sawyer, expands on the Measure A. This bill would authorize the Board of Supervisors to establish procedures. That's another catch-22. So it's the fox watching the hen house. So they get to outline what that procedure is going to look like, how it's going to proceed, and what those sheriffs are going to have to do, what kind of hoops they're going to have to jump through if they want to maintain their positions. So this is all egregious. If we look at California AB, Measure A and B is illegal. Why do I say this? Well, if you look at the California State Constitution, Article 11, Section B, the legislature shall provide for county powers and elected county sheriff. Removal of an elected officer, Article 2, Section 13, recall is the power of the electors. That means the people to remove an elected officer, not Board of Supervisors. Now, a lot of people have argued, well, what about charter counties? Because Los Angeles and a couple of other counties, about 14 of them are charter counties. They sort of have a home rule to themselves because they have a very large population. They're permitted so many things. Well, this is already outlined in the California State Constitution under Section 7. They have to abide by a county or city may make and enforce within its limits all local, police, sanitary, and other ordinances and regulations not in conflict with general laws. Well, general law means that the power of the electors, us, the people, to remove an elected officer resides with the people, not the Board of Supervisors. It can't contradict that. So this is how you know that this is an egregious act. But because people don't know their state constitution, let alone even knew they had a state constitution, and don't understand how it aligns with the supreme law of the land, well, it was voted into Los Angeles by 1.2 million versus 680,000. So again, they beta tested it in a charter county, and then now they're outlining it almost the exact same way per the state. But the problem is that if they want to do this, they have to put it out to the entire state and amend it in the California State Constitution. Well, they're not likely to do that because then that alerts all 58 counties in the state of California. So this is what they're trying to do to kind of just slip it in under the radar and see how far they can go. So this affects Assembly Bill 1090, Los Angeles Measure A and B. What this does is that this both illegally grants more authority to the Board of Supervisors not permitted under the California State Constitution. The state constitution doesn't grant them that power. They're not permitted to increase their authority. That is only granted by the people. This is an usurpation of the people's authority not granted by the United States Constitution under the Declaration of Independence. So again, the people have to permit this, and it has to be amended, but it's not. So they're granting themselves more authority. Egregiously forces a duly elected sheriff to potentially enforce unconstitutional statutes, mandates, regulation, ordinances, and health code violations by threat of being relieved of duty for being a constitutionalist. So if there's any, and mind you, none of which of the above highlighted are law. When we talk about statutes, mandates, regulation, ordinances, or health codes, those are designed to control the behavior of your representatives and people in office, not the people. We, the people, did not grant authority to our representatives at the federal, state, or local level to control the behavior of the people. So they don't have that. They don't have that power. This places all Board of Supervisors in violation of their oath of office under California Government Code Article 4, Section 1369, failing to protect the Constitution and state constitution. We'll get into that a little bit more as we go through this, but understand that is part of their purpose is to ensure that they're not in violation of their oath, and they have to stay within the confines of their positions. But if you don't know the language, if you don't understand how the law works, then they're going to pass egregious legislation. So all legislatures authoritative powers. Well, powers, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, I always tell people the Declaration of Independence is the foundation to the Articles of Confederation. If you want to debate me on that, we're not going to have a conversation because you haven't studied the Constitution. You don't know enough. You don't understand. That's the foundation. So if you look at what it says, governments are instituted among men deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Well, I didn't consent to give my local board of supervisors authority to usurp the sheriff just because, well, they don't like him or because they decide to perform some sort of ambiguous investigation into their department. And well, if they find something they don't like, they're going to remove them by a 4/5 vote. And then they're going to appoint somebody to put into that position that we did not elect. That is not their power. That is not a consent of the governed. They do not have that authority. The Constitution of the United States purpose of government is already outlined, is ordained by the people in the preamble that the purpose of any just government, the legislature being the strongest of all three branches, is to 1, form a more perfect union, 2, establish justice, 3, ensure domestic tranquility, 4, provide for the common defense, and 5, promote the general welfare, and 6, secure the blessings of liberty which resides within our unalienable rights endowed by the Creator. The U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8 lists 17 legislative authoritative power. All state legislative authority must be in agreement. All laws have to be in agreement with the supreme law of the land. So again, everything has to align. If it doesn't, or they start to grant themselves more authority, they are out of alignment and they are engaging in the legalities that are basically turning their backs on their own constituents. They don't have that right. So the California legislature, egregious host. Here's an example of bills that get passed. And I know you all know this, but this is a subtle one that I purposely chose, which was from Riverside. If we look at ACR 22, it's known as Assembly Concurrent Resolution, drafted by Republican Assemblyman Bill Asaley. So I want people to understand, stop looking at the R's and the D's and look at the nature of the character of the candidates that you're looking at or your representatives. This has to deal with Muslim holy month of Ramadan. The measures would acknowledge the Muslim holy month of Ramadan and express the legislature's respect to Muslims across California and throughout the world on this occasion. Well, if you look at the United States Constitution, Amendment 1, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of a religion. What I miss? Do you see the similarity there? The legislature, he wrote, the legislature's respect to Muslims across California and throughout the world on this occasion. But if Congress can't do it, neither can your state legislature. All things must be in agreement. You have no right to write that down. It's pointless. Why would you do something so subtle? A lot of people say, well, that's not that bad. Okay, but if you think about it, this is what happens when we look at children and they steal a Snicker bar. Next week, next month, it's going to be, somebody else's toy. As they get older, it's going to be a car. Pretty soon, it's going to be, we look at somebody robbing a bank, right? All things. If you start looking at this, if they do this right away, well, then what else are they going to do? Because again, if we don't know the laws and we don't hold them accountable, well, this was an egregious act. However subtle it is, if you're looking at all the bills that you've already talked about, all of those bills, most of them are egregious. So if you look at ACR 22 was introduced February 17th, 2023, which was just a couple of months after his election into his first term and is a complete violation to the oath of office. So again, we cannot put people in office that do not understand the state constitution or the United States Constitution. And when we do that, well, then we do not show ourselves approved as well. So you can't know what to ask if you don't know what to ask when you've never actually taken the time to study the California state constitution or the Constitution. So we start putting in people that we think, well, they have a bunch of accolades. Let's put that person in, or they have an R next to their name. That's not enough. We must show ourselves to be approved first with the information before we can then justify who it is that we're going to elect and put into office when they start subtly like this. And then we start seeing egregious bills that we're starting to fight now on a regular basis. If you look at some of the bills that have come across between, I think it was 19 and 2020, our legislators drafted over 4,500 bills, of which almost 1,000 were signed into law by Gavin Newsom. We're approaching right now, my research today was we're almost up to 7,000 bills. That is not to your benefit. And so we are being bombarded with subtle, egregious legislation to extreme legislations like with the sheriffs. So what is your representative's function? The primary function of all government bodies is to ensure the sanctity of the U.S. Constitution and state constitution stays intact. That is the representative's function. That is their primary function. They cannot go outside of it. So they have to make sure that anything that's put onto the floor has to be in agreement. It can't go outside of it. If you look at Article 6, this is what tells them: the Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof, in all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States, shall be the supreme law of the land. And the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary, notwithstanding. Basically, notwithstanding, despite or in spite of. Contrary meaning opposite, contradict, or both can be false, but both cannot be true. Meaning no law can be drafted or passed that is contradictory to the supreme law of the land, or what we call the Constitution, more so the Bill of Rights. When they draft that, if they put it even onto the floor for a vote and they get it to operate under the color of law, they have violated their oath of office. They have turned their backs on their constituents, and they have engaged in what is egregious, and they can be in prison for this. And I'll prove how and why that can happen. So let's get into willful and complicit deaf ears. Everybody says, Daniel, everything's falling on willful and complicit deaf ears. I don't understand why. Is it that our representatives are failing to adhere to our grievances? If we look at California State Constitution, Article 1, Section 3, it says that our representatives are there for instruction and counsel. That means the people don't have to sit there and ask them to do it. We are there to tell them to do it. That's their duty. They are not your leaders. So stop asking for leaders. When I talk to other people, or I listen to other candidates, or I talk to other groups, they do say we need new leadership. They're not your leaders. You are the sovereign. You are the leaders of this country. You are the kings and queens of the land. They are your servants. They are your representatives. So I am not here to lead you. If I was to be fortunate to get into the governor's seat, I am here to serve you. That is the big difference of what our representatives and why they're there. They are to ensure that the sanctity of the Constitution stays intact, not to undermine it. So in order to understand the egregious behaviors against we the people, we must first learn where the corrupting government operates within our US Constitution and state constitution, meaning wherever it's not said. If it is said, then they change the language. So government needs to undermine the Constitution for a number of reasons, which is why we're seeing the drafting of so many bills and the subtleties in the language. So when we talk about the language, the corrupting government have to change the language to change your perception so that they can pass repugnant legislation, so they can engage in their continued perversions contractually. That word contractually is key to what we're seeing with all these bills and why we have to make so many phone calls, or we have to fight so hard against our representatives. If we look at quick examples of some of these bills, for instance, SB 2223, we all call infanticide. It removed the words crimes against nature and changed pregnant woman to pregnant person. But that abrogates the laws of nature under the Declaration of Independence, that which is of nature and nature's God, which we'll talk a little bit later. A pregnant person is ambiguous. It means anybody, but that's not true because the laws of nature only provided male and female, and that which is of nature and nature's God of an equal and separate station. When we look at SB 1149, 12-year-old medical record can no longer be accessible to the parent because they redefined parent to representative. So now a parent is no longer what is of nature and nature's God. They are a representative. Well, that again is ambiguous. So they changed the language because they had to get around the laws of nature. This is why this passed, because we didn't know any better, or there weren't enough of us fighting. So this is how they change the language. Whenever there is, if it's already said, well, then they have to create some sort of loophole, and they can only do that by changing the language to change your perception. So wherever it's not said, well, wherever is it not said? Well, in the 13th Amendment, Article 1, Section 10 of the United States Constitution, and Article 1, Section 9 of the California State Constitution that we call the Contract Clause. So let's get into that. Willful and complicit deaf ears, understanding what you are fighting for. Civil rights versus unalienable, there are a big difference. I am not fighting for your civil rights. Civil rights, in my personal opinion, are garbage because of the things that I've learned. Why? Because civil rights are immunity and privileges given out by the government under eligibility through the exploitation of the contract clause, which then can become rights that can be waived and contracted away unknown by you, the people, the sovereign. Unalienable rights are inherent, natural, God-given rights. They cannot be sold, they cannot be transferred, they cannot be given away, waived, or contracted away, known or unknown, by the sovereign, but according to the ABA, which is the American Bar Association, would have the people think otherwise. So know where the exploitation of corrupt government resides, wherever it's not said. Let's look at the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment appeared after the Civil War of 1861. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. So I always ask people, and a lot of people know this, what is not mentioned? Now, of course, I can't ask people because we're not in a public forum. So, but what's not mentioned is voluntary servitude. So that's left out. This is what is used to achieve government deception in order to exploit the contract clause. So of the U.S. Constitution and most state constitutions, California is included. So basically, it didn't say anything like they're not going to force you. They're not going to tie you up. They're not going to pin you down. They're not going to do that. Government won't do that to you, but they will corner the market to force you to volunteer yourself into a life of servitude. And this is what they do by changing the language. When we look at Article 1, Section 10, known as the contract law or the contract clause, no state shall enter into any law impairing the obligation of a contract. Well, what does that mean? If you look at Section 9, Article 1, Section 9, it says almost verbatim, same thing, a bill of attainder, ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligation of contracts may not be passed. Why is this so important? Because the right to a contract is not limited. Since the 13th Amendment allows for omissions and omitted voluntary servitude, it is permitted for your government to engage in legal fraudulent concealment. But that fraudulent concealment only works if the people remain complicit, meaning if you don't know the laws. And a lot of ABSB bills are written under contract that have been done or created by Silicon Valley, corporatists, lobbyists, major corporations. They are forming the contract. They hand it most of the time to your representatives. They'll do a plug and play. And those bills a lot of times will favor a corporation under the contract. And then you and I, the people, have to suffer through that because we didn't know any better. What is the complicity? Ignorance is the de facto weapon. If you look at U.S. versus Minker in 1956, because of what appears to be lawful command on the surface, many citizens, because of their respect for what only appears to be law, are cunningly coerced into waiving their rights due to ignorance. So the courts already know this. The courts are very in tune, knowing that you are under the contract, you don't know any better, and they're not going to do anything to help you. And the reason why I know this is because if you look at what's called corpus juris secundum, if there's any lawyers in the groups, they can probably attest to this or affirm to this, but under corpus juris secundum, I think it's volume 7, don't quote me on that, it says that the relationship between client and attorney is that the duty to the attorney's duty is first to the courts, not the client. And there is nowhere in there that talks about the Constitution or state constitutions. So their duty is to the court. And it kind of gets into this area down here where the people's grievances are falling on deaf ears because of the ignorance of contract law. This forces the people to always have to opt out. You never have to opt in. I'll give you an example here. If you've ever been arrested, they read you your Miranda rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. They never say for you. They never say in support of you, to help you, to guide you, to maintain your innocence. They say it will be used against you. It's very subtle in the language. The language of the law is very clear in that manner. And the reason why they do that is because all crime is commercial. But when you look at the Constitution is very clear that whenever there's in order for a crime to have happened, there must be an injured party. And if there's an injured party, there must be a remedy. So if you make an illegal U-turn down at some corner street at the middle of the night and the police officer pulls you over and there's nobody there, who's the injured party? No one. Government cannot be the injured party, which means government cannot engage in forcing commerce or commercial activity or racketeering. Meaning if they give you a ticket, well, giving you a ticket is what we call extortion. It's illegal, but you don't know any better. So understand we are dealing with a federal and state corporation. We, the people, according to the American Bar, can sign away our rights voluntarily because we, the people, fall under business law. Because the United States is a corporation and all states thereof are corporations no longer operating as a nation state. We're no longer operating as a nation, meaning California can engage into a war with Texas. Nobody can do anything about it. Federal government can't do anything about it. We have that right. That is operating as a nation state, but we're under a business contract. So again, a lot of these bills that you keep seeing are a lot of times tied to a corporation, or they're tied to a contract agreement. You have to find those. Title 28, United States Code 3002, subsection 15 and 15A verifies and says 15 United States means 15A federal corporation. So if anybody wants to debate me on that, well, here's the code. See if you can find something else that says otherwise. You'll be wrong. All corporations generally fall under contract, business law, and profit margins must be met that we, the people, are bondage to. And a lot of people say, well, I'm not bondage to anybody. Well, yes, you are. And you have to pay up on this. I'll give you a quick example. So again, this is another reason why you're seeing a lot of egregious bills, is because you're bondage to a lot of things that your representatives are not subject to. Let's look at the birth certificate on the bottom left corner here in the state of California. It says banknote. The banknote is a bill or form of currency that one party can use to pay another party. Only the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank is allowed to print banknotes for money. If you look and you highlight it, it says void. If you look at the difference here, I had to use a contract. It's very hard to see with the naked eye. It says void, hard to see, but when contrast is added to proves the bondage and do not have the original birth certificate. So you're given a voided copy. So why are you given that? Because of a bondage that was signed off by you or your parents. Generally, of course, most of us, it's our parents when we're born into the hospital. It starts right away from the minute that you're born. So you're a bondage to have to meet on a profit margin. If you look at the birth certificate, it has all these letters and it spells out SELCROAIN UIESAE OPRTO. Now, some people said that's Latin. Other people says Greek. I'm still looking to see what that actually is, if it's in another different language. But I thought, well, what if it's an anagram? And I spent weeks on this, and this is what I came up with. Utilizing all the letters with nothing left over, the sentence has to make sense. It says, our lies are set in a coop. Coop defined as prison, jail, small cage, enclosure, vault, or like a bank vault. So basically your real certificate is in a vault somewhere that's being exchanged by the Federal Reserve, that is turned into an American bond sold to other countries, that then we wonder why all this money is going out to, say, Ukraine, is because of the bond that was sold off the future earnings of a newborn. So when you look at the United States Declaration of Independence, it stipulates the laws of nature and of nature's God. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So we have been endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights that among means there's more. These are life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. Why is this important? Well, if you look at the California State Constitution, Article 1, Section 1, it says all people are by nature free. Nature is the key word. Why is this so important? And how does this conflict with the contract? And then why are we seeing so many of these egregious bills that are being thrown out onto the floor? Through business and business law, to which they only have authority within the contract clause and cannot operate under common law, or that which falls under natural law, or what we call God-given. So corrupt government, the corporation, the federal corporation, the state government operating as a corporation, cannot operate under common law, because it keeps you, the people, above government. Whereas under the contract and the contract clause and all the contracts that we sign keeps us under the thumb of the government. So it switches the positions up. So now when you put your duly elected representative into that position, and they start getting into contracts, they have to abide by whatever it is that they're engaging in on the corporate level, because these people are drafting bills. They might draft a few of their own, but a lot of times here in our state and most other states are having to deal with a corporation or corporate status, because profit margins have to be met, which is why you hear a lot of our states say we need to run the state like a business, which if you hear candidates say that, or you hear your representative constantly saying that, they're telling you that they're going to force you to have to meet on a profit margin, irrelevant if it's made in bad faith, or it's egregious, or because, again, they're exploiting the fact that the right to a contract is not limited. This is how you run the state like a business. Example, Childhood National Vaccine Injury Act of 1986. It was signed into law by Ronald Reagan. This gave immunity to the pharmaceuticals. That's illegal. Congress created a trust that taxpayers pay into. created a vaccine injury court called Office of Special Masters to determine vaccine damage and financial compensations up to $250,000. It eliminated manufacturing incentive to prove efficacy behind pharmaceutical products. Government representatives provide guaranteed contracts with Big Pharma to produce drugs and vaccines to which the people, taxpayers, have to meet the profit margin via your signed IRS tax contractual forms. Government reps are later given a back-ended deal through inside stock trading, campaign fundraisers, endorsements, lobbyists, and why their net worth goes from 120 a year salary to later becoming a millionaire. Was that legal? No, because it violated the United States Constitution 14th Amendment, and even here in the California State Constitution under Article 1, Section 7, under equal protection of the laws. The people do not have equal protection of the laws when the opposing side that caused the damage has immunity that people, the taxpayers, have to pay into. So that's all illegal. This is how you run a state like a business. This is what forces the contract to keep being exploited under Article 1, Section 10, and why a lot of times we keep seeing bills that favor some conglomerate that we keep having to pay out and getting a nickel and dime for. And how is it that they have to keep, why do they keep turning their backs on us? It's also because your representatives are also under the contract. So what actionable steps can we, the people, do to fight back? This is just a couple of subtle steps. First, you have to understand the oath of office. Article 20, Section 3 says, shall take the oath. Shall means you have to. Now, I'm part of another group. Actually, I'm part of several groups. One of the groups that I'm part of is that we're noticing that some of our representatives are also, when they get elected, are not signing their oath of office. Now, when you run for office, you have to go into the registrar's office. You have to swear an oath. You have to sign the contract, and then that gets filed. If you get elected, you won that election, you have to do it again, and you have to sign the oath of office. It's a shall, you can't get around it. What we're trying to do now is we're trying to pull the oath of office from a lot of the representatives here in our state. And we're getting stonewalled because they don't want to give it up, or they don't actually have it. If they don't actually have a sworn oath of office, they're in violation and sitting in that seat, and everything they've ever enacted is null and void. It's illegal. They can't be in that seat. They have to do this. And if they don't, they have to be removed forcibly. So you have to know that California, it says down on the bottom that Constitution of the state of California, that they are going to fight against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Well, most of us will agree, we are dealing with domestic enemies. Well, who's the domestic enemies? Our representatives. If you look at right here, California Government Code Article 4, Section 1369, remember we talked about that earlier. Understand what constitutes the violation of an oath. Every person having taken and subscribed to the oath or affirmation required by this chapter, who while holding office advocates or becomes a member of any party or organization, political or otherwise, that's highlighted, that advocates the overthrow of the government of the United States by force or violation or other unlawful means, is guilty of a felony and is punishable by imprisonment in the state prison. Well, what's an other unlawful means? Otherwise, an other unlawful mean. Drafting egregious legislation is an other unlawful mean. Means you can't even put it on the floor. And if you put it on the floor, you have engaged in an other unlawful mean. And that is guilty of felony, punishable by imprisonment. If you look at the United States Code for violating Title 18, U.S. Code Section 2381, in the presence of two or more witnesses of an overt act, you all are two or more witnesses of your representatives' overt acts. Or in an open court of law, if you fail to timely move to protect the Constitution of the United States and honor your oath of office, you are subject to felony treason. That means that anything that your representatives draft have to be in agreement, or they are then engaging in felony treason. Because if they're undermining, then they are engaged in an other unlawful mean and failing to protect. Remember, I said their job is to protect the sanctity of the Constitution and state constitution because it keeps the people above government. That is your status. And when they do the opposite by changing the language and exploitation through the contract clause, they are engaging in felony treason. Under American jurisprudence, again, we talked about stare diocese. If we look at American jurisprudence, it's a multinational legal encyclopedia. The contents American jurisprudence 2D includes state and federal legal topics, which are alphabetically arranged in more than 400 topics or chapters. If you look at book 16, section 98, an emergency cannot, and no emergency justifies the violation of any provisions of the United States Constitution or state constitution, which means no emergency has just cause to suppress the United States Constitution or state constitution. If we look back at COVID-19, the Wuhan virus was issued as an emergency or state of emergency. That was illegal. Every single representative right now that is still sitting in office that went through the entire COVID-19 and supported the shutdown of our country has violated their oath of office, turned their backs on their constituents, and it was already ruled under stare diocese of section 98 of American jurisprudence that they had to work around without impinging upon our rights. They don't have to like it, but that's what they're there for, is to go around that. If we look at Mount St. Helens in the 1980s when it blew up, they tried to remove everybody, a lot of people by force who lived near the mountain. But it is your right, it is all of our rights to be left alone. Government has no right to force you to do anything that falls within your God-given unalienable civil rights. They can take that. Unalienable, they cannot. So a lot of people chose to stay next to Mount St. Helens, and unfortunately they died, but that was their choice. That was their freedom to choose for themselves. If we look at the Supreme Court starting back 1930 to 2022, only 146 Supreme Court cases have ever been overturned. Roe v. Wade was being the most recent. The 146 cases overturned is 1/2% of all Supreme Court cases. Among these 146 cases, 0 have been overturned dealing with abrogating or abridging the supreme law of the land. That means that if your representatives pass an egregious law that abrogates and abridges your rights in the supreme law of the land, it has never been permitted. And no one's ever said, oh, you know what, let's just leave that. It's always been overturned when the courts have realized, oh, that's an egregious law. No, you can't allow for that. If you look at Miranda versus Arizona, where rights secured by the Constitution are involved, there can be no rulemaking or legislation which would abrogate them. So when we look at every single one of these drafting of the bills, we have to know court cases as well. And we have to ensure that they are not engaged in trying to change the language. So we know that's egregious, take it off the floor, or you're going to be in violation and we're going to pull your oath of office. Number 2, Murdoch versus Pennsylvania. No state shall convert a liberty into a license and charge a fee thereof. Again, we call that extortion. Shuttleworth versus City of Birmingham, Alabama. If the states convert a right, meaning a liberty, into a privilege, the citizens can ignore the license and fee and engage in the right liberty with impunity. Marbury versus Madison, my favorite one. I think this was in 1802. All laws, didn't say some, didn't say a couple, it said all laws, rules, practices which are repugnant to the Constitution are null and void. Hoke versus Anderson, statutes which would deprive a citizen of the rights of persons or property without a regular trial according to the course and usage of common law. Remember, we are under common, not civil, would not be the law of the land. And Yikwu versus Hopkins, 1886, status is unchallenged and standing to this day, or at least in 2022, still to this day, 2023. Sovereignty itself is, of course, not subject to the law, for it is the author and source of the law. That's you. You are the author and source of the law. How do we know this? Because of a grand jury and petite jury. They're final. That means they are technically the fourth branch of government. The Supreme Court already ruled, also by Justice Scalia, the late great Justice Scalia, has already ruled in many of his writings that I've read that the Supreme Court cannot overturn a grand jury. They are the final say, because it is we, the people, that judge our a peer. And that is if they have engaged in crime that caused injury. And it is up to the people to decide what the ramifications will be. And that's final. It cannot be overturned. And that's already also been ruled as well. So it is we, the people, that are the fourth branch of the government, that our government is trying to flip everything upside down and remove that authority through the changing of the language of the laws that we see in the drafting of these egregious bills. And I have a bunch of more down here on the bottom. Davis versus Welcher, Sherry versus Cullen, and so on. So what actionable steps can a state governor do to fight back if they're for the people? Now, these are a little bit of extreme. Now, the reason why I say this is because we've never been in this territory before. We've never actually been here where we've had to fight so hard against blatant disregard for our rights. We are literally arguing, screaming. I have been to countless board of supervisors up and down the state of California, and city councils and school boards. I mean, I'm seeing tears and people screaming, and just it's never been this bad. So a lot of people say, well, Daniel, we just have to appeal to their better side. They have no better side. If they did, we would not be here in this mess in the first place. If you sit there and say, well, I really like my representative, and they have violated their oath, even just a little bit, like I showed you with ARC 22, with Bayless Ellis, who's a Republican, no, then you are the reasoning why we are in this mess is because you are making excuses and you are not holding yourself to the highest possible standard, which is what we need to do. So how do we get out of the mess? I will never bring a criminal or a terrorist or a domestic terrorist on any level, or anybody who has violated their oath, to the table. There is no table. You burned it down, you shut it down, and the people need to feel the same way because they are our representatives, our servants. We are the masters of this land, and we have to keep that in mind. So what can a governor do? And my solution is, well, we got to hold people accountable. Well, what does that mean? Well, we got to mean more transparency. Well, what does that look like? See, most candidates don't want to define it. Well, let me define it for you. Accountability is prison. Transparency means you get to be divulged to everything. Nothing can be held back because you are in control of all the information, and how you disseminate that is up to the people. So what can a governor do? On an extreme level, with everything that's going on, make a public nullification of all laws repugnant to the United States Constitution and state constitution, fire the health director, shut down the health department and their police department. A lot of people don't know they have their own police department here in the state of California that our current local law enforcement have no clue how to deal with. Seize health department fiscal assets and disseminate the money back out to the people. Remove all 10 of Gavin Newsom's appointed state medical board members and hold them under investigation to be tried in a court of record, not an nisi prius court. An nisi prius court is when you stand in front of a judge, but there's no jury. That's an inferior court. It's an illegal court. And we need to ensure that they're going to be in a court of record for coercion, forced medical malpractice, medical propaganda, and child abuse. We need to also replace 4 of Newsom's appointed commissioners on judicial performance to investigate, impeach, force retirement, indict, or remove or move to recall all 2,175 California judges if found failure to protect the Constitution in a timely manner, misconduct or questionable conduct, crimes against nature and nature's God, meaning violations of rights. Article 5, Section 7, call forth the state militia and declare a state of emergency against representatives who have on public record engaged in an other unlawful means attempting to overthrow the government, usurping the consent of the governed. Number 8, restore full authority to California's grand jury against these representatives who can and will also be held under a state military tribunal as domestic enemies. And number 9, all local governments will also be held under the same cause, but for the supporting, illegally extending, and attempting to extend local COVID-19 health emergencies in violations of HCS section 10.1080, 24.17.1, 24.17.2, section government code 37100, civil code 51B, civil code section 43, article 4, section 1369, title 18, 2381, and the California Brown Act. These are just a few things that a governor who is in support of the people would do to ensure that the power resides and stays with you. So that is it. If, as I said before, throughout many of my campaign, prison is the solution for corrupt government reps. Nothing less will do. And I yield back over to you.
Round of applause. I wish we could unmute at this point, but everybody could give you a round of applause. Thank you so much for that presentation, Daniel. So I would just like to remind everybody to take a deep breath because that was a lot of great information, first of all. But if you do have any questions for Daniel, there is a Q&A icon that you should see on your navigational bar right at the bottom of your Zoom screen. So go ahead and drop any questions that you have for Daniel Elena, I don't know if you saw, there was a few in the chat. Let me
I
go
did.
back.
I
Okay,
did.
perfect.
I did. There were 2 of them.
Okay, perfect.
So Daniel, the first one was from Stephen Burge. He said, can we revoke the servitude since we they didn't have informed consent?
Well, in the state, we have referendums when it comes to any of our state laws or legislation that's being passed, but it has to be done exponentially fast. And if we don't, then again, it's falsely operating under the color of law. And if that's the case, there is no time constraint. You just start engaging and pushing back. And pushing back, as I've said earlier, is you need to start off with their oath of office. And that is, you can pull that information under the California Public Records Act, as well as the Freedom of Information Act, must be done under notary, because when it's done under notary, then you are able to also prove that if they negate from giving you the information or handing it off to you, then you then can also fill out a form for violations of those departments that did not hand it over to you under those acts, because it's illegal. And that would be filled out under affidavit of witness that then should be and can be handed to your sheriff. Because now you're handing everything over on a silver platter. So you've already performed all the investigation and necessary steps. So there is no real, there's no limit to when they're in violations.
Okay. The second question was from, it's Marie or Mary Flower. And she wanted to know what makes the Nisi Prius court illegal?
It's an inferior court, because the Constitution, there's nowhere in the Constitution does it talk about a Nisi Prius court. Nisi Prius meaning first unless. So unless you first disagree, they're going to move forward. In other words, when you get into that court, they always say all rise. And when you rise, you've now submitted yourself to the court's jurisdiction. And when they say, do you understand these rights, or do you understand what you're being told? You should say no, because that's a Nisi Prius court. You always want to be ensure that everything is by a jury of your peers. So it's an inferior court. It doesn't mean that basically they don't like self-litigations. They don't like self-litigators, which is we the people. Because, well, the American Bar Association has attested already that you're inferior, and that you're not schooled enough on the laws to be intelligent enough to self-litigate. So it's against you. So that's why all crime is commercial. And if you force them to operate back under Article 3 of the Constitution, then it removes power away from the judge. So that's an Nisi Prius court. Technically, yes, they are technically illegal, because a lot of times what ends up happening is when you go to a Nisi Prius court, you stand in front of a judge, you tell them you didn't actually make that U-turn and that the officer was wrong. Usually they'll just say, well, no, you're wrong, hammer the gavel, and now go pay your fine. Now you got to pay $500, right? That's illegal. That's extortion, but because you didn't know the laws, there is no injured party there. But most of us don't go in prepared to doing that, because we put ourselves under their jurisdiction under the 14th Amendment. So this is why I tell people, start knowing the laws, because then you'll start understanding how to handle yourself in court.
Okay, so we have another question. It's kind of a 2-part. It's from Lisa Kastner. The first part is, do we have rights as a U.S. citizen to have these God-given rights? And then the other part is, or are we considered citizens of the corporation? Meaning we need to withdraw our U.S. citizenship and switch instead to be a state citizen, aka U.S. national. Or would that mean we give up our rights rather than reclaiming our God-given rights? Daniel? Is he there?
Did we lose him?
I hope not.
He might be frozen.
He might be frozen.
He looks frozen.
Mhm.
Oh,
Oh.
he'll probably come back in.
He'll come back.
And just so you guys know, that's my little one.
Oh, okay.
Not just some random little hand.
I thought you were doing
Steven.
that. That's why I was like,
Making sure I'm not frozen. Stephen, would be great to have a transcript. Yes, so we will be sending out the recording to everybody who registered for tonight's webinar. So you'll have that to go back and listen to.
He said, Daniel said that his Zoom crashed and he's trying to log back on.
Okay. It's all that great information they don't want us to have.
Well, I wasn't gonna do the conspiratorial thing, but yes, what a coincidence, right?
Right?
And Terry, AB 1090, yes. So the bill status has it that the hearing in the local government committee, he canceled the hearing. So the hearing was canceled at the request of the author. We have until June 2nd, Leah, correct me if I'm wrong, June 2nd is the deadline for any bills that are still in the assembly to move to the next house. So if he is going to keep it, he needs to get it out before June 2nd, and Daniel's back. So
Oh, sorry about that. I don't know what happened. Was that me?
No, we were thinking it was a conspiratorial there. No,
Ah,
it's
gotcha.
very-
All right. I'm sorry about that. So you were just reading a question about inalienable rights or civil rights.
So Lisa's question is, do we have rights as a US citizen to have these God-given rights? Or are we considered citizens of the corporation of the US, meaning we need to withdraw our US citizenship and switch instead to be a state citizen, AKA US national? Or would that mean we give up our rights?
Yeah,
or-
so that gets into a whole other ball of wax, which we do not have time for. But what I will say is this: is that the Constitution is very clear that we are born with, we are endowed by the Creator. That means that all of our rights are inherent. It means we're born with them. The only reason why we would be of a different citizenry is because of the contracts. Like I showed you, it starts off with the birth certificate, driver's license, social security, your tax forms. All of those things puts us under a different jurisdiction, under the federal corporation jurisdiction, which they can come after you because they have an army. So these are the things that a lot of times we're unaware of, which is why we constantly have to pay out so much money to all of these other nations or other countries in such a respect that we constantly see inflation rising at extreme levels for us. How do we make that stop? Well, it's because of the contract. So again, we are sort of having one foot in and one foot out. And what I would recommend is not to opt out. That is an option, but it's one of those, if you don't know what you're doing, some people have opted out of the 14th Amendment, they end up getting arrested because they don't know what they're doing. So this is one of those things where you're sort of having to play with one foot in and one foot out.
Okay, Luann had a question, really simple. Would family law courts be nisi prius and unconstitutional as opposed to criminal and civil law?
So it's so funny when I studying law right now, looking at tort laws and all this good stuff, lots of fun reading. Anything that has to do, anything that is not in front of a court of record, meaning in front of a jury, right, in front of a petite grand jury, then technically it's an inferior court. So if you don't know how to handle yourself, what's happening is when you get a lawyer, they're there to represent you. Well, the word represent is to represent you under that jurisdiction. So, and you're dealing with admiralty. So again, that's under a different title, United States Code, I think it's Title 28. And when you look at that, you're realizing, well, we deal with the supreme law of the land, not maritime. So again, it's a different jurisdiction. So anything that is a nisi prius or anything that's an inferior court technically is not a court of record per the Constitution. So that should just answer your question right there. Technically, they're all illegal. It's just, again, we don't know any better. So we stand in front of a judge. We represent ourselves because we allowed someone else to do that for us, rather than self-litigating and trying to understand the laws. Again, your lawyers their duty is to the courts first, under their oath, under corpus juris secundum. So keep that in mind.
Okay, let's see, let's go to Marcia. What happens legally to all of the representatives who are getting away with the egregious legislations? And especially the current governor who is complicit in signing all of the egregious bills?
Well, again, as we already went through, anytime you violate your oath, it doesn't matter. Even if you execute a law that's egregious, and if you pass a law that's egregious, and you get it to operate falsely under the color of law, and the courts already know that this is going on, they're not going to help you in that respect. It's like me asking for, if I'm on a football team and I'm the coach and their quarterback is way better, it's like me asking to borrow their quarterback. They're not going to do it. You have to know it. And if you don't, they're not there to tell you. That's why you always have to opt out. You never have to opt in. So what happens to them? Well, again, it's the people. I'm actually one of the few people that has been able to actually pull Gavin Newsom's bond. I have a copy of it. So and usually offices of sheriffs or your representatives, mayors, stuff like that, governors have to have a bond attached to their oath of office. You pull that oath. Now, we've had bond for the wins, but the problem is that a lot of people down south gave up. People up north were getting the wins. But again, you have to have an association attached to their oath of office that proves with an outline of all the things that were egregious that do not harmonize with the supreme law of the land. It's a lengthy process. You're not going to get a home run. But technically, they're supposed to be in prison. But because Gavin controls the militia, no one's going to raise a flag to him. And because most of the judges, their duties to the courts, they're not going to sit there and help you out. It's a technicality that the people have to find to remove them out of office. So this is where education comes into play, and which is what I'm trying to do with some of these groups, to try to corner your chief of police, your sheriffs, and your state assembly to do that is legal and lawful because you pulled their oath of office. Then you pull all of their bills that were egregious. Then you pull the bond and you send it to the bond company. If you can't get the bond, because a lot of DAs won't let you do it without a law degree, then you find a lawyer who will let you use their office to make the pull under the California Public Records Act and of the Freedom of Information Act. They have to give it to you. And then when they're not, then you have your affidavits of witness, because now they're not moving to timely protect the Constitution, which protects the people. And as you do this starts to prove that they're engaged in criminality. I also have been able to, and I can give it to the group, I have a list of every single member in the state of California dating all the way back to the 1980s of how many people in the Senate, Assembly, judges, and sheriffs were removed from office. So you also have to utilize their diocese, meaning they play by their own rules. You just don't know the rules. And their rules are, you have to know who's been in prison before, who they got out of office, and how we can use that same methodology to get them out of office as well by force, because we figured out what they're doing. So it's a lengthy process. It wasn't easy for me to find, but I can hand that over to the people and working on stepping processes so that you can start cornering these people and getting it on record in the Board of Supervisors meeting. Meaning when you go to those meetings, you have to show, I have all 5 of your oaths of office. I have all 5 of your bonds. I have all 5 of your violations. I have all 5 of, once you show all this stuff, now they know that if a bond is pulled, then they're liable personally and directly. If they don't have it, you can still move forward, but now you have to show their complicitness under these articles that show that they're not moving to protect the Constitution in a timely manner. And when you do that, you also utilize this under witness affidavit to hand it to the sheriff, because you've done all the investigation for them. Now they have to figure out, now it puts their back up against the corner if they don't move in a timely fashion either to execute the law, because a crime is a crime. It doesn't matter if they have experience in dealing with removal of somebody that's in an office, a position, representation, it's still a crime. So these are the things that we're not engaging in. And this is where our educational growth needs to really accelerate.
All right. So next is kind of a combination between Angela Liu and Karen. It's based on the Dominion machines and the mail-in ballots. One part is, how are we going to prevent election fraud? And the other aspect is, how are we going to, or what can we do to protect our rights against the corrupt machine?
That's a great question. So I don't know, and unfortunately I know people can't answer, but you guys can comment on the side if anybody's heard of Dr. Douglas Frank. So Dr. Douglas Frank has also been going around the country along with Mike Lindell, my pillow guy, And I actually met with him just a few days ago. We had lunch together for a few hours so that I could clarify exactly what he's doing and some of the groups here in California. And I can hand off the information to Karen. So if you want to utilize it to get together with some of these people here, what they're doing is one of the methods is to understand that our system is centralized. So our voting system is all centralized. So it doesn't matter what machine they're using or what software they're using in the company that's utilizing it. Again, they're under contract. It's irrelevant because it's all centralized to the Secretary of State. Well, right there is a problem, because when you centralize anything, well, then it's under such a tight control, you'll never know if anything is acting egregiously, or is, the numbers are in flux. Or even when I ran for the recall, people were calling me, telling me and showing me on the phone, Daniel, let me show you the machine. Your name is nowhere on the machine in my county. And I wasn't the only candidate. So in the California State Constitution, it speaks about bad practices for voting. So we have to keep that in mind, and then get together with Dr. Douglas Frank's groups here in California that are canvassing. And what they do is they go out, they canvass to verify, knocking on doors to see how many people actually got more than one ballot, or several ballots, or find out if people even in their own home were passed away, moved out, they've got their neighbors, or somebody else. And what they do is they put all that data together. Once the data is together, then they take all that information under the affidavit and they hand it to the sheriff. Sheriff doesn't do anything, but what that does is it forces a court file. And when a court file is there, then that court filing has now to investigate the machines in some respect. That proves that the machines are hackable, the data is irregular, and that there's more than enough data to prove that they're faulty. And so this forces them to have to remove, or at least do something different than what we've been experiencing. So that's one method. There's another group that right now is working on, if you look at under Article 2.5, I think it is the California State Constitution, all votes have to be counted. Well, they didn't count them all. Right. So this is where, again, where the machines are delayed. They take up to, 30 to 60 days, whatever happened to, being able to do it in a day by hand. So, and the only way we're going to be able to do this is one of the main things that I've also told people is, and I would recommend anybody that's listening right now, is your county clerk and registrar are sometimes one and the same. Nobody ever goes after the clerk or the registrar. Why? Most of them are voted in. If you look at Ventura County, well, the county clerk here is in charge of the machines. That person is voted in. Well, then vote them out. They're one of the easiest to remove in our state, because they get anywhere from 20 to 30,000. Well, you only need 12%. That's it. And then get them out of office. Show them that you've got half the signatures. Number two is we never force our registrars to outline what are the protocols to be made public when there is an irregularity. Well, if they make it public, that means that they have to enforce it. Well, they don't always make it public as to what happens when an irregularity happens with the machines, or somebody voted for them, or somebody came in, falsely utilizing your names. We have to have them outline it. And then number two, we have to understand too, so that it uses in our favor, is that illegal votes are not looked upon as fraud. The two are separate. The courts look at them differently. And one of the last things is there are a couple of court cases that deal in election fraud, election integrity, and we have not actually assimilated what happened in those court cases, if they're still ongoing, and again, utilizing their diocese to see what's taken effect before, where the potholes were at, and then implementing so that we skip over those barriers, so that we can get back our elections. Because I firmly believe that this 2023 is going to set the tone for the 2024, and if whether or not we're ever going to get back integrity-driven elections. So we have a huge amount of work cut out for us. I can get together with Karen later on this week and tie you up with some of the groups that will actually educate. They go around and they teach people in the county what you can do to prove that the election fraud is transpiring, to force the county sheriff to pull the records and match them with their data, and then give it a case file. When that happens, now your board of supervisors' backs are up against the wall about what they're going to do with the machines.
Okay, moving on. So Lisa says, my understanding from attorney Todd Callender is that the state health department may be an extension of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and that HHS is now under U.S. Department of Defense, which would imply that the state governor cannot control what is done in the state health department anyway. So I guess that goes back to what you had said about firing the staff that he selected for the health department, Daniel.
Well, it's irrelevant if you, all of that is irrelevant. Again, the enumerated powers under the 10th Amendment and the Bill of Rights are left up to the state. And the last word is the people, meaning when the people are the last phrase, that means the people have the final say. So in all three-letter agencies, a governor can kick out of the state. There's nothing that the federal government can do about it. FBI, I can force, as a governor, I could force all the FBI to say, you can't operate in any of the counties without going through the county sheriff first, because they're a duly elected chief executive of that county. You can't do anything without informing them as to your activities. That's also been ruled also by Justice Scalia, who had to deal with two sheriff deputies who arrested two FBI agents operating in their town, and the FBI tried to turn it around on them under federal jurisdiction, and it won in their favor because, well, they're the chief executive. The sheriff didn't like it. He didn't like what they were trying to do, and it ruled in their favor. That shows and proves that the chief executive has control of the three-letter agencies, which also proves under the 10th Amendment that it doesn't matter if they're a health department geared and protected by, the federal government. The federal government's jurisdiction expands only as far as DC. So when you understand the Constitution, then you understand that's as far as their jurisdiction goes. We are of a nation state. A governor can turn that around overnight and say we are no longer operating as a corporation. We are back to a nation state. That takes care of everybody in the state and their citizenry as to what they're falling under civil or unalienable. And there's nothing the government can do. There's nothing that the federal government can do about it. No Supreme Court judge can do anything about it. Legislative body can scream all they want. There's nothing that they can do about it. That department will get shut down overnight, at least under my administration.
So in conjunction with the question she had, there was also another part saying, what is the body that is writing the legislation in this state? Who funds that body, and arranging with legislators to carry the bills?
So the way this works is this: I don't know if anybody in the group has run for office. When I ran for Congress, that was the door that opened my eyes to all the back-ended deals that was happening. What happens is when a lot of times your newly elected representatives that you absolutely loved, you thought is going to do a great job, he or she, you just felt like, they checked off all the boxes, and you wonder why all of a sudden did they do a 180? How is it that they're starting to pass these egregious bills that are contradicting what they said they were going to do? I don't understand. Where did I go wrong? One of the things that they do is that when you run for office, a lot of times you'll get, depending if you're rattling the right cages or even the wrong cages, and you're making a big stink, they meaning corporations, unions, super PACs, lobbyists, you will get a ton of packets in the mail to your campaign. And a lot of them will say, we're interested in endorsing you. If we endorse you, and it's written in multiple different ways, you have to take our money, because there has to be an exchange in goods and services, and it's usually money. And when you sign the contract, a lot of times you'll see some state codes down on the bottom, or anything that just sort of a kind of a warning, but it's very small print. And it basically says that if you accept their money, that if you do say or enact anything that would be contradictory to their cause, their corporation, or cause any damage or anything that would prevent them from moving forward with whatever plans that they have, you personally are liable for the damages. And so a lot of times I was getting phone calls from these super PACs that would say, have you got our package? My answer, of course, was yes. And they said, well, listen, we know that the max donation in the state of California is $50,000. Could you use $50,000? Well, what candidate can't use $50,000 for their campaign? They all can. And I said, well, yeah, but I'm noticing some of these codes down here and I haven't had time to research them. And they said, well, don't worry about that. We also have over 2,500 members. We can tell and instruct our members to give you an individual max donation, which at that time was a little over $2,500. So now do the math: 2,500 times 2,500 plus $50,000. And they said, we'll show you how to keep the money even if you lose. So a lot of times, and the way that works is it's tied to a nonprofit. So if you lose the race, the money has to be either given back to everybody who donated to you, or it can be given to the caucus or the party that you deem is worth the money, or you can give it to your favorite nonprofit organization. And then what happens is they'll get you to either get a relative or yourself to be on as a board advisory board member, pay that person whatever they want because they're nonprofit, and then they recycle that money back into your bank. That's how they do it. So if you sign the contract and you get into office and you didn't realize what you signed, and say you made you signed an agreement with a super PAC that, you know, deals in whatever, you know, the electric company, right? You can't do anything. You can't draft anything. You can't say anything that would impinge upon their efforts to safeguard maybe their profit margin. So now you're stuck. Then in our state, if you're dealing with a super majority, well, the super majority, when it comes to our Republicans, well, the super majority here has been in control for nearly 54 years. So the Democrats that have controlled, and they've only been a super majority maybe for, I think maybe for 6 or 7 years, but they've had the majority of the control for at least up to 57%. And what they do is that if you don't do what they want under the state constitution, as well as the United States Constitution, they can be reported on through roll call that they're not compliant and they're not acting in, you know, formal behavior, and can be kicked out by the representative under supermajority. So now they're forced to have to behave if they want a few bones. So that's kind of how it works in our state. And so now you see why a lot of our representatives suddenly do a 180. That's why, because they either tie themselves into the contract, or they're too afraid to go against the supermajority because they're afraid to be, you know, kicked out, and they want to do something for their constituents. So they're forced to sway a vote in the favor of whatever Democrats they've got to, unfortunately, lick their boots. And that's what we're dealing with right now.
So I guess in final, the other aspect is, her question was, is it correct to say that legislators are paid to carry the bills and paid to get them passed, as in the author of the bill?
So a lot of times the author of the bill is sometimes a corporation. And what they'll do is they sometimes will put on a ballot measure. A lot of times when you vote on a proposition, you'll have to vote yes or no. And a lot of times when you vote yes, you felt like you voted no. When you voted no, you really voted yes. Well, now it's got to the point where it doesn't matter if you vote yes or no. The bill and the language is favoring either way. They're going to get their money. And so if something gets shot down, I don't know if anybody remembers the Uber bill. I think at that time it was AB 5. And in the state of California, they recycled numbers. That's done on purpose to confuse you. So what AB 5 was this year was not AB 5 2 years ago. So you're confused. That's on purpose. Well, the people of California shot that down because it was going to force Uber drivers and Lyft drivers to have to be union. And they were like, no, we're independent, and they wanted to remain that way because it fit their timeframes, and they didn't want to have to go through a bunch of hoops. And so we shot that down through Proposition, I think it was 21 at the time. And so, well, all this money was paid out by the taxes union. So the taxi union paid all this money to our representatives to draft all these bills. But what your representatives can do is they can cycle the money from another proposition and pay that out. So that way the union still gets their funding and their money that was promised. And then we end up paying out through another so-called bill. If you look at AB 1090, it's there. In addition, there's the juvenile bill inside there. So it's kind of merged. So sometimes they merge a couple of bills together, right? Or they were going to try to force people to take the COVID-19, but they helped Buffy Wicks try to throw it inside of a traffic bill. So a lot of times I'll hide the language in there. We only read a few sentences of it, and we say, oh, it's a great bill. And then when we pay that, they'll siphon money over and then pay that union or that super PAC the money that they promised. So we still end up getting stuck with the bill because, well, we didn't know any better and we didn't do our research.
Okay. So a couple of questions from Cassia Williams. So one of the things that she had mentioned was that she thought that maybe you mentioned that a religious exemption is considered illegal here in California. And I just responded to her regarding what you had done for Melissa. So she kind of has a two-part question. So one is the religious exemption here in California illegal? It was also in relation to issues with children having students being forced to be homeschooled because if they were to go to school without, I'm assuming without a vaccine, or that they're not allowed to get a religious exemption.
Okay, so the short answer is yes, it is illegal. I think it was Senator Pan that passed SB 277 that was on communicable diseases for children. And so what that did was they removed the religious exemption. Well, that's in violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution. You have no right. So, but then what they did was they also forced as I said earlier, they forced a bit of commercial activity, meaning that they closed the market on our taxpayer dollars that we still pay out if you're a parent, but your child can't go to public school, and yet you still get taxed on because, well, you wanted them to go to that school, but they didn't take maybe you didn't want to keep going on with their vaccinations, right? So the pharmaceuticals are tied to the health departments and your insurances that, we have to pay out. That forces a little bit of commercial activity in the way that, well, if we want insurance, we have to pay for that, right? So we're forced to pay that. That's illegal. And then when they remove the religious exemption, that corner of the market for us to take our kids out and do something different, like homeschool, and then we have to pay for a private, right? That's forcing an industry to go in a different direction. That's illegal. So all of that whole bill was illegal. Now, so any company asking for a religious exception or exemption is also illegal because it abrogates Article 1, Section 1 of the California State Constitution, and the last word being privacy. It's not your right to know what I have or have not done under privacy, because under the new California State Constitution, Article 1.1, they have now passed, which was for AB 2223, infanticide, that now allows, we are an indefinite abortion state. And that the reason why that passed is because, well, it's a medical procedure that is to be held under privacy. Well, then so are my shots. Under privacy, you don't get to know what I've done and what I haven't done. So the way my wife and I did it was, we knew the laws, we knew enough. And it took us about 3.5, 4 months for my wife, who is a NICU nurse with UCLA of all places. And we won, and she got a religious exception indefinitely, because we knew the laws. We knew the California State Constitution, the Constitution. We filled out a 15-page packet. We outlined it with court cases, religious beliefs. Then they also wanted to say, well, we want, one of the things too is they say, well, we have a religious expert, we'll have to create a panel. That's also illegal. But under if you read the Bible and you're a Christ believer, well, it says that of every man, God is the head, and of every woman, the man is the head. Well, that means that her religious expert was not a pastor, it was her husband. So I said, well, then you have to put on there that your husband, who's the religious expert in the home, per our religion, per the Bible, and here's the Bible verses, will be present. And then they got that back and they said, no, thank you. We're okay. We're not going to do a panel. So then we got the letters back, and it said, okay, you have now been given a religious exception indefinitely, which then I told my wife, you need to sign it without prejudice. So when lawyers get together, a lot of times lawyers will say, okay, this conversation is without prejudice. That means they're saying, hey, listen, I'm, you can't hold me accountable to what I'm saying here, right? It's not written in stone. And so I say, sign it without prejudice. That way they can never come back and say, well, we've got a new pandemic here, or epidemic. And, that one was for COVID, but we really need to, up this. So you got to get this new shot. And we could say, no, you can't fire us. You can't move us because we signed it without prejudice. And I said, and the second they file it, it's done. Well, they took it and they filed it. It was done. And so nobody could touch her. And then, of course, a lot of people that were there were fuming because they're like, why don't you have a little gold star that shows that you're vaccinated? And she was like, because I'm not vaxxed. Well, how'd you get away with that? Because we knew the laws. That's why.
Okay, so another one, Mary Flowers. It was earlier, she had asked about the Nisi Prius court. And so her follow-up question was, are there any constitutional courts? If there are, how do we, the people, get our cases into those courts?
A constitutional court is a court of record as per the Constitution. That means it's a jury of your peers. That's a court of record. So when you are standing in front of a petite jury, then you are in a court of record. That is the court that you want to be in. So a lot of times when people say, well, do you want this, when you go to a Nisi Prius court and they say, well, do you want this to go to trial? Your answer should be yes, unless you want to settle out of court because maybe they're going to just pay you out. And that's all you want. It was just, there was an injury to my son. And we had all these medical bills because the apartment complex, didn't clean out the ventilation. And when they kept telling me they did, I actually opened up the vents. I got it on video, and it looked like death in there. And we looked in all the pipes, found out that there was a piece of fiberglass inside one of the funnels leading into his room. So when we turned the heat on, we didn't understand why he was coughing and gagging and he couldn't breathe. So we poked him, we probed him, we x-rayed him, we MRI'd him. We couldn't find it. And finally, I just said, it's got to be the vents. I don't care what the complex is saying. I'm going to dig in myself. And sure enough, it's all on video. You can see me shoveling out just disgusting stuff. Hadn't been cleaned out for a decade. And once I showed them that, I said, you're paying for this. I'm not a money greedy person. I said, you're going to pay for all of this when it comes to my son. So they were like, do you want to go to trial? And when I came back, they said, they're willing to offer to pay for the medical and, damages to your son if you sell it out of court. That's all I wanted. I just wanted that just for my son so that we didn't have to pay the medical bills. We got some pain and suffering basically for we had to pay for a number of things, the cleanup and all that kind of stuff. And that was it. We didn't make millions of dollars. It was just a few $1,000s that I was like, pay for this. And then that forced the complex to have to clean out everybody's vents. So everybody benefited from that. So again, court of record is, you want to be in front of court of record when it comes to anything that's coming against you, because remember, the laws say, the Miranda rights say, can and will be used against you. And so I always say this too, when you have people knocking on your door that is law enforcement, let them know you are recording this and anything you say can and will be used against you. They don't like that. And this is kind of how we do it. So understand, court of record, jury of your peers, in front of a judge, a magistrate, no one else is there, Nisi Prius court.
But how do they get it to the court? Like, how do they get it to the court of record, Daniel?
You can, under the Constitution, it says that you can request a speedy trial. You can request a jury of your peers. So if you don't want to deal with a ticket and you really want to present it to a court of, a court of record, you have every right to do that. And you have a right to a speedy trial. So you can use that. But the danger is that they'll tell you is that, well, if you lose, you're gonna have to pay everything out. You're gonna have to pay to the courts even more. All right. So that's kind of where they kind of throw you under the bus there. But again, if you feel justified and you know that you're in the right and you've got all your information, you're well organized, then put it in a court of record. And you have every right to say that. Judge cannot say no.
Okay, and so Terry says, in regards to what was learned last night, that the Board of Supervisors in California have not sworn their oaths as originally written. They are a corporation, not a government. The solution from what she heard is for we the people to reclaim the government, which was vacated 150 years ago. Do you agree?
Yes, then you would be referring to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, which would technically be correct. So ever since then, that was technically a coup d'etat. And that put us under a banking cartel. The banking cartel is who controls the purse of Congress. Congress controls the purse, but they're controlled by the banks who lend out the money, because we have been removed off of the gold standard. And then, and which was by Nixon, but we were removed off of, no longer utilizing true assets. So now it's a currency, right? So now they just print. So that forces your representatives, your congressional representatives, to sort of have to bend to the whim of the Federal Reserve. As I showed you earlier, the Federal Reserve utilizes banknotes. The banknote is your birth certificate that they sell to other countries for debt to force us or any other nation that they're in control of. Usually central banks do this to their people and force us into a type of slave labor. And a lot of times that money we never see. And we never know where it goes because there's no fiscal public oversight committee. So we don't actually have total control. We're always at the whim of the central banks. So the answer to that would be yes, that is absolutely true.
Okay, so we're down to the last two so far. Lisa Merrick says, I'm concerned about the illegals at the border being given citizenship. How will that impact our elections? Is there anything we can do to stop this?
So what's going on at the borders there's multiple facets as to what they're doing. One of the things that the Democrats do will send somebody, a representative of one of the Democrat offices, or they'll use, the party funds that's a part of the caucus in our state, and they'll hire people to go down there to the borders. And as they come in, they will give them a phone and they will register them under Democrat. And then what happens is that inflates the voter roll. When they inflate the voter roll, that allows the machines to offset and wait to see what the voters are doing when they vote early. So if they vote early and everyone's heavily going in after, say, a Republican, say every Democrat in here in the state, they'll offset those numbers based off of the inflation of the illegals that come into this, who will never even vote for the most part. But even if they do, it'll offset the numbers. Then that allows them for a new program to program the machines remotely. And when they do that, then they can justify the race to be extremely close while they disenfranchise everybody else. And what I mean is here in the state of California, we have over 40 million Californians, depending on the census and the accuracy of the census. So if we look at that, they can't control 40 million. So what they can do, though, is they can disenfranchise you and then stick with the historical norm. Well, the historical norm for governor is around 12 to 13 million. Out of the 12 to 13 million, they only need 6.7. And then if you look at this last election with Dolly, well, Dolly got around 4, Gavin got around 6, 8, give or take, last time I checked. And everybody thinks, oh, that was a really close race. And then what happens is your counties are then ordered by the Secretary of State after 12 to 24 months, they have to purge those numbers. And so then what that does is it dips the numbers back down for the next election cycle. And then when they're audited, they're only audited 1%. It looks like the numbers have been justified. So when you look at the contracts, I would also recommend everybody start pulling the contracts in your county as to when it comes to the voting machines. There are contracts because they make them with these companies. The contracts, sometimes if you look at them, will stipulate that the county board of supervisors are not permitted to allow for the auditing of those machines. So they can't touch them. So you can scream at them all they want. You can threaten them all they want. No judge is going to prosecute them, or DA or city council or anything like that, because of the fact that they're not doing anything illegal under the contract, right? They haven't violated anything, and the right to a contract is not limited. So they get away with it. And here's the other thing. Why would they get rid of the machines when those are the ones that got them in the office in the first place? So you're asking them to write themselves out of a job. So we have to push their backs up against the wall with their oaths of office and with those bonds and with the contracts, that if the contracts are illegal, that contradict the state constitution. If that's the case, then we have a different argument here. But again, we have to show them that we have this information. Once we get that and we show them the data when we've canvassed, now we give it a court case number. Now those machines are publicly under scrutiny now. And now that pushes their backs up against the wall. And sometimes when you see that they're doing scrupulous activities, sometimes these representatives will just quit. And that's what we're looking to get them to do, is just step out, get out.
Okay, Carolyn Perkins. So it's kind of along the lines of what you're talking about. And she just wants to know if the reason that the government is selling us, basically our birth certificates, to foreign nations, does that explain why they want all the immigrants?
No. So we as citizens who have filled out all the documents, we're the ones who are paying for the offset of those illegals coming into our state. So we're sort of the slaves. They're getting a free ride. It is when we have a child or we have a lawful birth certificate that then is sent to the Federal Reserve or a bond agency, and then it's turned into an American bond. Then they're the only ones authorized to sell that bond because it's a banknote. Well, the banknote, as I said earlier, is basically money. So then they sell that money to that country, making whatever promises that you and I are completely unaware of, which is why when you look at the Ukraine deal, well, whatever deal was made, when the bill came out, it was 6,000 pages long. Well, that's on purpose, because they know that they can't read that in humanly in a 3-day span. It's not going to happen, right? No human can do that. So they basically force them to vote first, then they can read it. But by that time, it approves the legislation to take our tax money and send it overseas. That's why they're getting all these trillions of dollars. That's why Ukraine has all this money. And we keep saying, why are you doing it? That's why. And every congressional official that you are representative knows this. So when they tell you, well, it's for humanitarian reasons, you mean we couldn't use humanitarian reasons with here in our own state for, our 120,000 homeless? No, they're basically just putting up a front. They're not going to tell you all of this stuff because they also are under contract. So again, when they're working in DC, they're technically under a different jurisdiction. They're not under a sovereign state. They're under the United States federal corporation jurisdiction. So they're stuck and they can't divulge a lot of this information, at least they get thrown in jail by the Gestapo. There's no getting around that. This is why we have to be very educated on who we're putting into office, if they know what they're up against, and do they know how to fight this? This is why I tell people, listen, you don't have to like me. If you don't want to vote me as a governor, then use me as the measuring rod. And if you can't do that, then you're kind of at fault. Stop voting for people that you like. Everybody wants to vote somebody that they like, not voting somebody in that they understand, has a clear understanding of what they're up against and willing to pass the Rubicon, because that's the only thing. It's kind of the old saying, how do you handle a bully? Punch him in his face. There's no other way. A bully will not listen to anything else. These bullies will not listen to anything else. These people, if I'm the governor, when it comes to the protection of our children and you're a pedophile, you're on a fast track to the death penalty. It's that simple. You're not touching our children. I don't care if you want to call yourself MAPS or anything else or pedophilia dysmorphia. It's irrelevant to me. You don't touch these children. Now we're going to come in with, fire and brimstone, but nobody wants to do that, right? Because that's crossing a Rubicon, rocking the boat. Well, you're either going to go quietly into the night or you're going to fight back. But one way or another, you're either going to fight now, here today, or somewhere else later tomorrow. One way or another, you're fighting. You don't have an option. You can reset yourself to new grounds, catch your breath, but you're going to fight. And this is another reason why they're bringing an influx of illegals as well, is because of the fact that they also not only want to overwhelm the system that overwhelms us taxpayers, but it offsets the voting. It forces us to have to pay out under new laws that now allow illegals to have medical benefits, voting rights, all these exemptions that we have to pay out. And in doing so, that also there's a few of them that are coming in that are here to disrupt and to cause mayhem. And that we have a total distrust when it comes to the Constitution. I can't tell you how many people say, well, we just need to throw out the Constitution. We need to redo the Constitution. No, you need to reread the Constitution. It's really that simple. But we just have a lot of people that are focused on their emotions of things rather than getting down to the nitty gritty, educating yourself, and then putting it into action. I can't do it for you, but I've got a group of people now that are starting to put things into action of the things that I've been putting out there on what you can do locally. And start showing them that you are a tried and true person, and you're showing yourself approved of the information that you have, that they have, they're cornered now. So this is where we're at, because the last thing what's going to happen is if you agree that we are at war, whether it's an economical war, agricultural war, educational war, spiritual war, we have not engaged in an arsenal war, and that involves our Second Amendment. And if that's gone, there's nothing left. So you have to ask yourself, what are you going to do? How far are you willing to go now?
So, okay, there's a couple of things. So I do want to just mention that Cassia, I know that you want Daniel to answer whether or not he's ever removed a legislature or an elected official from office, and to kind of give you the process or repeat the process of obtaining an oath of office. I think, Karen, if you're recording this, I think in the beginning or during sometime in here, Daniel explained the process of removing somebody from oath. But if you have more questions for that, we can, definitely have Daniel help you with that. Lisa had a kind of a double-edged sword over here because of the Nisi-Prisi court. She said that she had a friend that was told by a commissioner in traffic court that there is no right to trial by jury, that was taken away from the court system some time ago. And so she was refused to have her case seen by a real judge. And so right now she is feeling that she's being forced to, accept a plea under duress. And so she doesn't know how to proceed
Yeah.
at that trial.
Yeah, no, that's not the first time that I've heard that. It's because you don't know the court system, because you don't know how they operate. You have to go down the rabbit hole of understanding how corpus juris secundum actually functions, American jurisprudence. You have to understand court cases, and you have to understand the Constitution. But if you're under the contract, the Constitution doesn't apply. She was a prime example. They took the Constitution and threw it out because of whatever contract was in there. So then you have to know contract law. And so now you've got to go back into whatever the contract was. Well, what was the contract? Was it a ticket? You got to look at that ticket. If you don't know the state laws when it comes to what you're dealing with, then they're not going to allow you to have a trial because, well, you're under the contract. So they're going to remove all of that stuff. You have to invoke Article 3 and Article 3 of the United States Constitution. That forces the judge to have to behave a certain way. So again, these are, but you have to understand how that applies. So we don't have enough time. But these are the avenues that you're going to have to go down when dealing with corrupt courts, which is why I put on there, what can a governor do? We never go after our judges. Here in the state of California, one of the things that you can do is that if you feel like you're being put up against the wall by misconduct of a judge, you have every right to go to the Commission on Judicial Performance. And there are, I believe, 11 members here, and that's written in the California State Constitution, that you can file a claim. Flood the office with complaints. There's only 2,100 and some odd judges here in the state of California. Flood them with the complaints, because then what that does is it forces them to put that judge under investigation. A judge can be impeached and removed. The judge can then also be subjected to can be benched by a superior court judge for the misconduct, and or can be recalled. And judges out of all the branches are the easiest because everybody does down ballot voting. Nobody focuses on the judges. They just kind of, maybe they vote, maybe they don't, or they stop there and then they just send in their ballot. So that's a way to go after the judge, is also to recall at a local level. It's very simple. You just, again, it's like running for office, pull papers. You go to the county clerk, you say, I want to make a recall on a judge. You give them their name, and then they give you the file paperwork, and they will walk you through it happily. The county clerk's office will, under the registrators or the department that they tell you to go to, will walk you through what documents you need, what forms you have to do, and then you begin the process. That's another way of going after those judges for cornering you and taking the Constitution and throwing it out. So,
including the commissioner, because the commissioner,
Yep.
because the commissioner, instead of accepting her refusal to plea, he put in a plea of not guilty for her and set a trial date. So that's what happened, was that she was, he pled for her.
that's another ball of wax right there. It's nobody. So you gave power of attorney. When you give power of attorney to somebody, or you allow for something like that to happen, then you've acquiesced. And so then that gives the court more authority over you. So now that's another ball of wax. So I would have to hear almost the full thing to really get a clear painted picture of this.
So I
would just recommend right now is start getting ready to, start learning the court system. Start learning what judges can and cannot do, what lawyers can and cannot do. Start getting familiar with corpus juris secundum, American jurisprudence. Start finding court cases and start getting familiar with what stare diocese is and how to self-litigate. That's really, it sucks to have to do that, but that's just how, this is where we're at. I don't like it any more than you. Somebody asked, have you removed a legislator? No, I have not removed anybody. I have put their backs up against the wall. I have gone to, and I'm on record on several city council meetings that I've sat on, and have actually helped sway their vote to not do something that was illegal. Again, because of outlining the laws. Sometimes when you do that, they won't vote in favor. And so they move, they know that, and then that prevented some of these cities that I've gone into from actually casting a vote that would be egregious to the people. So I have done that.
Okay, let's see here. Okay, so then let's see, Luann, Mr. Mercury. Okay, may I ask, are you Republican, independent, or constitutionalist?
I am a constitutionalist. I really don't care to subscribe to Republican or Democrat, because let's face it, on both sides of the fence, they're equally as corrupt. And I have experienced that on both sides, both with the GOP here in California. Elena can attest to my experience with the heads of the GOP during the recall, favoritism. I've also experienced bribery on both sides of the fence. I see how they operate. I understand how they work. It really is a money-making engine that really doesn't deal with, the grievances of the people. So this is partly why I inadvertently became a constitutionalist. In fact, many forums that I've gone to, people are starting to call me that, not because I asked them to, they just started saying it because I wanted the answers. I didn't understand why and how could everything be falling on complicit and willful deaf ears. What is giving them this authority? How are they getting away with this? Why is there not any indictments and arrests made? Who can we turn to where it's like there's nothing left? We have almost no more options left before people start to pick up arms. And I'll tell you right now, I've spoken to tons of vets, and veterans do not want this. And a lot of people say, why aren't veterans involved? Well, they are, but they're not as heavily as you would like them to be, because they've already fought their wars. But they can see the writing on the wall, and you are not going to want the meat eaters to come and bring this to your door. So a lot of them are like, please don't screw this up. And so people have to start realizing that what you thought you knew, you had it wrong. And so this is kind of where we're at right now, is we're very limited on options on what's left.
Okay, and then Casilla says, AB 957 by Wilson passed Assembly and is now in Senate Judiciary Committee. AB 957 would make judges strongly consider that affirming gender of a child is in the best interest of a child. When the judges decide who gets custody of a child, etc. That's what came to mind while you were talking about the judges. You just wanted to share that.
Yes. So that is illegal. The reason why is because it's in violation of the Declaration of Independence. Again, the foundation to the Articles of Confederation. When you read where it says that we are of an equal and separate station, and that we are of nature and nature's God, endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights. When you look at nature and nature's God, nature again only provided male and female. Nature did not provide hormone blockers. Nature did not provide any type of surgery. Nature provided what you were born with, and how you're born biologically, anatomically, and of course, chromosomally. So they are in violation because parents are the natural guides and natural caregivers to that child who is brought into fruition, that shares the chromosomes of both the mother and the father, the male and the female. And at the moment of conception, they are by nature the rightful controllers of that body, of that human being, not the courts. And what the courts are doing is controlling the behavior of the people. We didn't give them that authority. So if you go to your representatives and you explain this in this sort of a breakdown, you're letting them know what they're doing, also in violation of their oath of office. When you do this and you pull their oath, now they know that you mean business, but nobody does this. I have yet to find anybody doing this. I've got just a handful of people now that are finally starting to do this in a couple of counties that I'm trying to get people to do. So I would encourage you, if you're in San Diego, if you're in Oceanside, wherever you're at, is to get those oath of office, pull them. You're going to get a bunch of stonewalling, pull them, do everything you can to get your hand on that stuff. And when you do, then you have to attach it to court records, court cases that are of similar nature. And when you do that, you go in there with the laws and the breakdown, and you put it on public record. When you go to your assembly and you stand on the floor, or you go to your board of supervisors and you walk up to that mic, this is now on public record. You're making it known. Their city councils are going to have a field day, or their city attorney is not going to like what's going on. Their DA is going to be upset because you're getting all this on record. Judges, again, they follow their own rules. You just don't know the rules of engagement. So you have to kind of go in that mannerism. But if you just go and you're kind of spouting out stuff, they're going to sit there like they always do, and they're just going to play on their phone. When you go in there with, I have, Assembly Scott Wieners, I have your oath of office right here. By the way, I also have your bond. And also, by the way, I have a list of all of your egregious actions that are against the California State Constitution. Now he's going to put his phone down. And I don't know anybody that's done that yet. And this is what I'm working towards right now with a couple of people. So everybody that's listening, please start going in that direction, and don't think you're going to hit a home run, because Gavin Newsom had 6 attempts of the recall, Everybody thought it was a home run. Well, Orrin Heatley and Mike Netter had to file twice, and it was their fifth. It was the fifth attempt. They were the fifth attempt. There was sixth after that, but because the fifth one got legs, the sixth group pulled their papers and recanted, and because it was already off and running. So you're not going to hit a home run out, because if they know that you don't really know, like I always tell people with my wife, we said, don't say please, don't ask if you can. Could you help me find, locate, do you know? When you do that, you show your ignorance. When you go in showing yourself approved with the knowledge of information, they don't have a choice. And I've seen that happen a multitude of times.
So, I guess the question is how, so I have somebody that says activists in our county pulled those oaths since 2020, absolutely useless, magic thinking. And then Mary says, again, she doesn't remember how to pull the representative's oath of office. And is that info in a transcript, or how can, what can they do to pull?
So
the oath?
everybody's oath of office is done at the county clerk's office, and there's a file. A lot of times they'll hand it to the registrar, or they'll hand it to a different department. It just depends on your county. Every county is different. It's not enough, as I already said, to just pull their oath. You have to do in addition to. That's just one layer. And so this is why I tell people, you're not going in with a magic bullet. That doesn't work that way. So you have to go in with a number of other things. And so this is why I keep telling people, they'll try one thing and they'll throw their hands up in the air and go, well, it didn't work. Well, of course not. They know you're coming, so they understand. This is why the bonds now, they won't just, they used to give them up. They won't give them up now. Now the DA is lying to the people and saying, well, you can't have it. It's privacy of information. No, it's not. They're public servants. And so we got smart, and we worked with a couple of lawyers who said, use our license and send it in, and write out the report in the form, the request form, and use and stamp it with our office license, got the bond, right? Or got their, got the information that they required, because they know what the people are starting to do. Just like the machines, they love it when people vote early, because then that tells them who's on the radar and who they need to suppress so that they don't overtake. That's why it's not a good idea to vote early. If you got a group telling you to vote early, they're the opposition, right? And like I said, if you think you're going to hit a home run because you started this in 2020 and 2022, or 10 years ago, what did you attach with that, right? And then how many times did you do it? So these are the things that we can't give up on. And again, it's just one of those things where we have to be ready for the fact that they're ready too, because California is the 5th largest economy. They are not going to give this state up without a fight. And they're dirty. They are willing to cheat and eat their own. I have seen Democrats eat other Democrats live and make them give up, make them, kowtow, or make them use that person who ends up being the scapegoat just to maintain their authority.
Mhm.
That's what we're up against.
So Lori says, do you have a recommendation for a program, school, online class, et cetera, to learn what you're suggesting they should know?
Gosh, I can recommend, Karen, I do have a couple of groups that do actually specify.
I'm going to say too that I think we need to bring you back. So if you want to hear Daniel again, I think we should go for an in-person meetup. So drop it in the chat if you guys do want to have Daniel in person speak to us. But go ahead, Daniel.
Yeah, so basically what I can do is I can I do have a couple of groups that do this. They do educate groups to listen in on their educational seminars to kind of get people caught up. Some of it is for, strictly just on the Constitution. Others are state driven. So it depends on their state, because we've got people coming in from all over the place, even out of country. I've seen people come in for some of these other groups. So I have a couple that I can give to you later this week. We'll connect, and you can disseminate it out amongst your members here where they can. But one of the things that I always tell people is start off with the United States Constitution by just rereading it. Number 2, get your state constitution, the most updated one. And I would say with the California state constitution, there's a small portion in the California state constitution that says that all current legislation must adhere to the 1849. So that means if it's out of agreement with this, with the 1849, then it's null and void. It doesn't apply. Well, then you need to know this. And so, which is the first original California state constitution. So these are the things that I would say start with that first, and then you're going to have to get into the nitty gritty. And I can make a recommendation of a list of my top books that kind of kickstarted me. And for those that are Christ believers as well.
You have that really big, thick one that you always show everybody? The
Which
that-
one? I have a dozen of them.
The most recent, the big white one.
I have several. I'd have to dig it up. I've got a bunch. So, and so
Wait.
those, I'll make a recommendation of some books to get everybody started so that, and just understand, it's taken me almost 4 years to get where I'm at. It was almost like going back to college. So I didn't anticipate, it was like a political science degree, but I had no intentions in doing that. It was just, I was looking for the answers, why everything was confounded and what the real answer was. And now it's easy for me to see where the legislation is out of alignment, who is acting against their constituents in all branches, and what we need to do in respect to fighting back. And this will hopefully help everybody, because again, we're never going to get somebody even like me into office if you want a constitutionalist, if we don't know how to have laser-like focus and where we're going to direct our fight, right? Or who we're going to direct it against in your county, because it's different in every county. The people up north are not dealing with everything that the people down south, San Diego, they're dealing with all the illegal entries. If you go out east, out to the farmland, they're dealing with agricultural and water issues and all the stringent laws that Gavin Newsom has put on them out there when it comes to our farmers. Again, coastal regions, everybody's dealing with something different, and this is such a massive state. Everybody has something different that they're screaming about.
And Daniel, if you can send me that starter list of recommendations of books, we can go ahead and send that out to everybody with the recording, with tonight's recording. That would be great.
So you want me to give you a list right now?
No,
Well,
no, no.
so
You
we
can
have-
email it.
To everybody's okay.
You have
I was gonna say,
one, you have
I
one
need a
last
little-
question.
Need a day. I gotta write it
Daniel.
all out. Yeah. Okay, great.
So
That's
it's from
that's
Michael
perfect.
George, so
Okay.
I don't want to leave him out. He says that if our entire election system in California has been centralized, what method is currently in use to deliver the election results to the Secretary of State? Is it through the internet? And who gave them the authority to do this? And is it not legal to have voting machines connected to the internet? Thank you. And he says, God bless everyone here.
Yeah. So it was voted on to have to be I think it was
Connected to the internet.
2020 where we became in 2021 we became a permanent mail-in absentee ballot. So that allowed and permitted all the machines, whether it's a counting machine or an actual voting machine, under our California state codes, and there's a number of them. You can go on the california.gov website, and under section codes, you can find everything that has to do with voter integrity, and of course in the California state constitution. And you'll already see right away where they're out of alignment. But that's where it was permitted, was that it was voted on or falsely voted. And now we are a permanent mail-in absentee ballot state, and of course a voting machine. And they're expanding now 1,000, almost 10, by 1,000 more ballot boxes, mail-in ballot boxes in every county. So centralized, meaning that the machines are set up at a certain time that automatically send all the votes that come in on that day and have already been accounted for when people come in for voting, and shut down at, I think it's around 8 o'clock. And then the Secretary of State gets all those numbers. And yes, it is done through the internet. It's not done through a phone call. It's done through, but now Shasta is the only county, and Shasta is the one that I would recommend everybody start mirroring and getting information from as to what their board of supervisors did, what stonewalls that they hit, including with their registrar was fighting against the board of supervisors, and what ended up happening through their investigation that stopped them from saying, we're no longer going to renew the contract. And they have now agreed with the people of Shasta County to get back to hand counting. So what is their policy? What are they doing? Why did they do it? bring that to your board of supervisors and say, this is what you, in under Article 1, Section 3, they are there for instruction. You're not there asking them, you're there telling them. And you need to quote these. And of course, it's not going to happen right away. You need to corner them. And sometimes cornering them is to reveal some of the things that they've done egregiously, illegally, whether it has to do with the laws or their personal life. They're public representatives. It's time to start digging. A lot of people always say, Daniel, how do you find all these, the red flags on these candidates? Do your research. If they are a representative and they've been in office for, multiple different seats, they no doubt have left a trail of something behind them. This is why I don't like career politicians. Stop voting in career politicians. Stop asking. I love it when people say, Daniel, well, do you have, any experience in running for office in the governor's seat? Nobody has experience being in the office of governor. It doesn't matter what position you've been in, right? And one of the other things is that people say, well, what's your qualifications? Well, I have to be the right age. I have to be able to vote. I can't be a felon. I qualify, right? These are if our forefathers wanted accolades, and they wanted, PhDs, they would have put that in the Constitution. They didn't. They wanted men and women who had the willingness and the fortitude to stand up in the face of adversity, no matter the cost. That's what they wanted. And so, so this is why I tell people, follow and mirror what other people are doing that got success, and then utilize that and repeat and rinse and see where that gets you. And then be prepared to be challenged.
All right, and it looks like we got through all of the questions. Great job, Elena, for monitoring those questions. And thank you so much. Oh, wait, hold on. We got one more. Oh, Shasta County, question mark.
So Shasta County, Dan, I guess is the question that Lisa had. It's probably wanting, she wants you to probably touch base on the voter register being removed and
So what happened was in Shasta County is that their contract was up for renewing the Dominion machines.
Mm-hmm.
And they had already had a demand to have them removed. People didn't want that anymore. The argument with the board of supervisor was they also admitted, I think I can find the article on it, was that they had argued, but why would we get rid of the machines when these were the machines that helped us get elected? But the people didn't trust them. And at that time, there was an announcement. I think either the local sheriff or the PD had also found that there were some scrupulous activities with the machines that dealt with the registrar's office, not the registrar herself, but I think the office. Don't quote me on this, but I'm just basing it off of my memory. And so because of that, they got into a number of meetings that, of course, are all public to scrutiny per the California State Constitution, that wanted to hear if this was still wanted. And the registrar was the only one who kept fighting against it, and maybe one of the board of supervisors. But eventually they came to the consensus that this is what the people want. And though it's going to cost them millions of dollars to go back to hand counting, if that's what the people wanted, because it makes them have trust in the integrity of the elections of their county, then that is what they're going to do. So now they have set a new precedence or reprecedence of the way things should be. And so I would recommend anybody right now in a different county that's struggling with trying to get the machines out of there is to do canvassing. Once the canvassing is done, I'll connect Karen with the group that will teach people how to canvass per Dr. Douglas Frank's pattern and what he's put together for everybody in every state, how to prove fraud, how to utilize the sheriff once the information is pieced together on a silver platter, how the filing works and what that's going to do to affect your board of supervisors, and then push to get them removed and not renew the contracts with those voting machines irrelevant of the company.
Ooh, we have more. Are we going to keep going?
I think we can wrap up. And Elena, I think I saw you typing this question from Lisa. How does the fact that we are slaves under the bond connect with the planned move to central bank digital currency?
Oh, yes.
So central bank digital currency is coming. I've already given a couple of presentations on this, whether we like it or not. All that does is it doesn't allow for the people to liquidate, meaning that they're not going to let you crash the system. Like what they did during World War II. They're not going to allow for that, right? When we had the Great Depression and the Depression in 1920, they're going to do everything they can to prevent the people from liquidating their account for fear of the fact that there might be a bank holiday, and so that's kind of how it's tied.
All right, and that was our last question. We will have to do a part 2, a follow-up. So